Hello, everyone, and welcome to another session of our ReBookulously Goodreads book club discussion group. For those who don't know, I can't believe anybody's watching this who doesn't know. It seems like an odd video to click on without having any knowledge of what is happening. We are, okay. So I'm Damon Jensen Heitman. I'm one of the pastors at First Presbyterian Church. And we are in the midst of reading through this book. It's called Home. My cover's a little bent, so there we go. It's by this person, Marilynne Robinson. And we've invited folks from the congregation to join together and read through the book this fall, and we're having some discussions about it. For the purposes of this discussion, I am joined by Anne. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. My name is Anne Fairbanks Bolke, and I'm a retired English professor at Hastings College.
And Constance?
Hello, I'm Constance Malloy. I am also a retired English professor from Hastings College and sometimes CCC.
And Jenny?
Jenny Welsh. I have taught at CCC also, but currently I am teaching remotely online classes for Bellevue University out of Omaha.
Very nice. And so we are, or at least I am, up to page 250 in this novel. So we'll talk about things up to that point. This novel is also connected and interwoven with, I think, 3 other novels, one of which we have read called Gilead. So there's a chance that we'll pull information in from some of those other novels as well, if we think that it will help us understand these characters that seem determined to be misunderstood to me.
Yes.
So I don't know where we want to start, where we want to hop in. We get a lot more of Reverend Ames in this section of the book. We get, maybe just before this, Reverend Ames and his wife, Lila, and their son, Robbie, come over for dinner. And there's a whole escapade about the money in the piano bench. And nobody really seems to believe anybody about how that money got there and why, until Gloria gets out the big Bible and puts it down and swears on it. And then Jack is finally determined. He gets himself to church. Finally, he seems encouraged enough by his interactions with Reverend Ames up to that point. And goes to church, and it doesn't go well.
There's a false start too, right? Isn't there? He tries to go to church and he tells Glory, and they sort of agree to not tell their father. I don't, for probably many reasons, actually. But he doesn't go the first time he tries, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's the morning before the Ameses come, that morning, Jack starts to go to church, and then he ends up standing just outside the church, and Reverend Ames sees him there. And then that same evening, I think, is when Ames and Lila come over for dinner. I think
sounds right-ish. I mean, we kind of have it's interesting in this section. We have sort of these circles happening where it's like the same sort of scene keeps playing out but gets extended or has more drama or has more maybe not drama, contention within the characters and their interactions.
Yeah, and we get this, Jack goes to church, and I remember this from Gilead, but I don't quite remember what Ames was thinking at the time, because in Gilead we get kind of Reverend Ames' perspective and his story, right? And Jack goes to church. He maybe ends up sitting next to Lila. I can't remember.
Specifically sitting next to Robbie.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Mhm.
And then the sermon for the day ends up being about Hagar and Ishmael. For folks who may not be familiar, so this has to do with I think it's Abraham and Sarah, and Sarah can't get pregnant, and so she convinces Abraham. They have a maidservant named Hagar. She convinces Abraham, and Abraham willingly goes along with it. Like they both kind of hatch this plan together, that he'll get Hagar pregnant, and then he'll have an heir that way, at least. And so that child is Ishmael, is born, and then Sarah does get pregnant by Abraham, and then this kind of jealousy sort of thing develops between Sarah and Hagar, and Sarah's worried that Abraham is going to love Ishmael more than her son, and Hagar and Ishmael get exiled essentially, and are left out in the wilderness to die. They don't die. God saves them from starvation. But so it's the story of Abraham. At least Jack is hearing Ames talk about a story of a father who abandons their child. And
Yeah, rather heartlessly, it seems.
yeah, and I wish I could remember how what Ames was thinking.
To have gone back in Gilead and like to reread that, because I'm sure that's in there, but I didn't do that either.
I seem to remember that Ames was really worried that Jack was sort of trying to usurp his place with Lila and with the son. And he was very protective that these are my people, and I don't know what you have in mind, but
Well, I think that was Ames feeling his own mortality. I mean, we have so much of Botan, still trying, folks, still trying, of his mortality in this book. But really, that's what the first one was too, was Ames feeling the end of his life coming. And I definitely remember that sense of him feeling like Jack is here to replace me, and him feeling very defensive of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could also see, and like I said, I should go back and look at it, but because Ames he's been diagnosed with a fatal condition. I think it has to do with his heart. And I could see him coming across this story of he feels as though anytime he's going to be the one abandoning his wife and child, and I could see him coming across that Hagar and Ishmael story as a story of that kind of would mirror his own lament, and that because that story does end with God providing for those two in the wilderness, and holding out some sort of hope that God would provide for Lila and for Robbie after his own death. That he may not have really meant it as a hypercritical thing.
But that is how Jack hears it. He hears it very much as a rebuke of himself and his the experience with the we learn her name in this section, right? Annie Wheeler, if I'm remembering correctly, is the name of the young woman who had his child.
Right.
I would ask a favor before we discuss further, and Damon, if you could speak to us a little bit about predestination, because that's kind of a stream that flows under all of this stuff, you know, kind of what is it and does it apply and so forth. So as the minister in the group, if you could do that, please.
Yeah, I was gonna feign an illness and ask Greg to fill in for me today. But then I chose not to. I chose to live up to my obligation. Boughton would be proud of me, I suppose. So, yeah, predestination is a thing that kind of develops out of Calvin and out of his theological musings and ruminations, and becomes a cornerstone for the Reformed faith. A lot of folks today, most pastors, I talked to Greg actually about this morning within the Presbyterian tradition. He said most Presbyterian pastors today would not really assent to predestination, or they would do so with a number of qualifications. But probably the idea of predestination that is floating around in the ethos that the novel is set is kind of this theological assertion that, and taken to its extreme, you end up with double predestination, which is that people, from the moment that they are born, are because we are born as sinners, right? Because we are born in hopeless depravity, I think is the phrase that Calvin would have used. Like, there's really nothing that we can do to earn our salvation. That salvation is exclusively like a gift of grace, like presented by God, and that you folks are either destined to end up consigned to hell, or they're destined for salvation. And there's not really anything that can be done to change that. And so that's kind of the basic question, right? Behind predestination has to do with, like, can the state of a person change? Can the nature of a person be altered in one way or another? Does that make sense?
I think so. Well, and it for me, it lines up with what we're talking about in this book, really, in terms of Jack. And can Jack be redeemed? Can Jack redeem himself? Is there anything redemptive in Jack? I think is a question that just keeps rolling here with us as we read.
Yeah. I'm choosing to hold my tongue for a bit.
I do want to go back to the sermon and what happens, the fallout that comes after that. But I do want to back up just a little bit first, because the one thing, now I am where you are, Damon. I'm on page 250. I haven't read any of the other books besides Gilead or the short story. So my brain is still trying to redeem Jack. I am still trying to find something within his character that lifts him up just a little bit. And one thing that I was questioning during this section, and really through the majority of this book, because we see more of it than we could have with the perspective of Gilead, is that Jack really does push against his father and his father's racism. You know, and we start to see that very early in this section, like even on page 155. That might be the Emmett Till discussion, but like the Reverend just is not there, isn't like literally physically isn't willing to put up with these conversations, and Jack keeps pushing that. with him. And that was my one question. I was like, well, maybe this is Jack's redemptive quality. And I'm curious to know what others think of that. And I understand that I don't know what's coming beyond the books, and that's fine. I actually don't like spoilers, so I don't want to know. Don't tell me. But what do you think of the discussions in this section?
Well, I think Bowden makes it very clear that he does not think that Black people are equal to white people.
Mm-hmm.
They're not to be admired. They're misbehaving. They have bad qualities. And so very clearly, Bowden would not accept Jack's proposal to start a life in Gilead with Della.
Yeah.
So that there's, the air's let out of that possibility completely.
Yeah, and in a later conversation, I think it's part of the big conversation with Ames. Jack he pushes on this and talks about, he highlights this as this is one of the fundamental flaws with Christianity, is that this love of your neighbor ethos that the Christian church in America has clearly not, the white Christian church in America has clearly not lived this out, and continues to clearly not live this out. And he is able to hit on that as this point of hypocrisy within the church, and by implication within his father.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and as I've said, I think in with this group before, that rings true to my experience of a Presbyterian church in Cincinnati at the same time. And I don't remember ever hearing anything negative about it, about African Americans. They simply didn't exist to this church. All the emphasis was on, private piety and, saying your prayers and that kind of thing, telling, fourth graders not to commit adultery, this. Yeah.
Hopefully they were all able to live by that. And you pointed out in your comments related to this, the way that the author uses the television to bring in kind of the outside world in some way. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I just think the author is really skillful and unobtrusive about that, because this world that they live in is, they're in the town of Gilead, and among the people that they see is really very tiny. And it seems like, there are no new people, there are no new ideas. And Jack and Glory also try not to interact with anybody else from the town, which makes things even more restricted. And so with the TV, I mean, it's a perfectly natural thing as the novel is moving along to turn on the TV. Well, let's watch the news, which people had done. And there are the fire hoses and the dogs at Montgomery. And so it's a situation where the characters then respond to what they're seeing. And I think, it really broadens the novel, way she does that.
And I agree that it's very smoothly done, because I don't even until like I saw your note about that, and then listening to you explain it some more, I didn't even realize that that's what she was doing. But of course, the lens is so focused, so narrow in terms of we're basically just in their house. Sometimes we go to Ames's house. That's it. And so but then to be bringing in these, greater issues and these larger questions, it's a really well done way of doing that, so that you do get not just the microcosm of their home, but then also what's weighing on the house and weighing on the people in the house also from the outside world.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Now,
go ahead, Ann.
I'm sorry. Bowden does subscribe to some magazines. I notice The Nation is one of them. I can't remember the others that he then shares with his friend Ames. And so other ideas come into their lives. And they argue, and Bowden and Ames enjoy, our arguments about various ideas, but the television allows the characters to react to what's happening right now. And particularly the shows Bowden in not a positive light from my perspective.
And Jack makes the comment that I found really interesting. It depends on what news you read.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
He says, he and his father both agree. We don't read the same papers.
Right.
Yeah. It makes, now that I hadn't thought of this until just now, but Constance, you pointed out in your on your sort of inside baseball here, we have a little sheet, the four of us, of some of the things that we found interesting or that sort of thing, which is what I'm referencing here. But on page 193, you highlight that Glory thinks of Jack as the one true worldling in the whole tribe of Bowdens, right? And so, because I'm thinking back to Gilead, in Gilead, we got essentially nothing from the outside world, right? But in Home, we have Jack, who's the worldling, I suppose, right? And Gloria has had some experience with the world as well. But it makes sense then that when those two characters return, we would also start to see, and using the television, yes, is a great way to do this, to get more glimpses of the outside world into the story that has these characters that have come into contact more frequently, I suppose, with the outside world.
And it's because of them that the television is in the house.
Right.
Right? It's Jack and Glory or is it just Jack who spearhead that little project, and it, their father doesn't seem to love it, but yet it stays. And now it's become, again, more of a needling point in their relationship and in their conversations. And this is where I started to notice, because that conversation happens early on in this section. And I had mentioned sleep the last time we had talked about this, and just the mentions of sleep and tired and rest and everything. So I've been paying more attention to that as I read. And that's when I started realizing in this section how often their father fakes sleep. He just shuts down. He just closes his eyes. And it's like, if things get a little too testy or he doesn't like where things are going, he just closes his eyes. I don't know what that means. Is that end of conversation? Is that a self-preservation thing? He's trying, it's very interesting to me how often that happens then once I started realizing he was doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had never thought of it, Jenny, as a willful choice. But I think it certainly could be, right?
Yeah.
And I think about all of the ways that we come up with, to avoid engaging with things that make us uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And what other choice does he have? Because he can't get up and walk himself out of the room. He can't make an exit with his physical body really without assistance, right? I mean, don't the children help him get from place to place
Yeah.
within the house? So it,
Yeah.
you know, in that sense, it's more self-preservation than it is maybe rude defiance, which is how I started to kind of look at it, I think. But that's true. That kind of is his only means to shut it out.
Yeah. And again, keeping his world small,
Mhm.
keeping things out that he that doesn't want to deal with. And in sort of in that context, and I mentioned that before, but on page 219, and I just found this, his reference to going to Minneapolis. And it sounds like he was only there once. About midway down that page, Bowden said, "Yes, that's very interesting." Then he fell back on his experience of Minneapolis, his closest equivalent to foreign travel. My mother and I went up to the Twin Cities from time to time. So it's not just once. And we saw Lutheran churches everywhere, just everywhere. A few German Reformed, but the Lutherans outnumbered them 20-1, I believe. That's an estimate. Minneapolis is a large city. There may be Presbyterians in areas we didn't visit. You just gotta love it.
That made me laugh too.
Yeah, right after I think Glory says that Jack is worldly, Jack says, "Our father is not a man of the world, let us say."
Mhm.
It's so true.
And
Yeah.
which one of you pointed out is, I think it's Glory, who makes the comment about she's acknowledging that they can't change their father at this point, like or something with his theology or something. What was that?
Yeah, it's yeah, it has to do with the he's gotten oh shoot, somebody put it into this little comment
It's in the
section
notes
thing,
somewhere.
and I
was gonna
can't-
say,
oh, here it
and-
is. So Constance, you pointed this out. Looks like it's maybe around page 154 or so.
Also, it's early in this section.
Yeah, Gloria says, "I think we're beyond the point where we can raise questions about his theology, though. If I pointed out a contradiction in his thinking, I would probably upset him. He's gotten touchy about that kind of thing."
Yeah.
Mhm. As his body becomes less elastic, so too does his mind. It would seem. Yeah, and so one of the things, the big thing from this section of the book is this conversation between Ames and Bowden and Jack. And Jenny, you pointed out that it was 12 pages long.
Yes. So in our notes, I titled this "The Porch Conversation" in capitals, because it's not like that in the book. It's not called that. It's not like the telephone call like we had at the start of the book. But in my mind, this was an event. This was a thing, and it was a thing both in the sense of the conversation and the argument, and Glory sitting there just going, "Okay, I've heard this a million times. Give it 5 minutes. Like, this is not going to go well," sort of thing. She knows exactly where they're going, and it's no place productive. But just in terms of the writing, and again, this isn't something I've done before. I've not counted pages of a section before while reading either of these books. But because it doesn't have chapters, I've gotten used to, like, I'll read a section and another section, and then sometimes I'll kind of look to see, well, how long is the next one, to know if I have enough time to read right now or if I need to come back to it later. And I started flipping. I'm like, what is this? And it is so long. To my knowledge, it's the longest section in the book in terms of the little vignettes that we get. And I thought that was very interesting stylistically from Robinson's, her writing.
Yeah, and it's like the most forthcoming that the characters ever really seem to me to be. They're still kind of veiled in their language, but it's the most sort of, it's the closest folks come to really putting their cards on the table, I suppose.
Okay.
Right.
And what page does that start on? I'm wanting to.
216, I think. I started look at this in my notes. I have like arrows, and I just like the arrows just kept going. I'm like, it's not done, it's not done.
Yeah.
There it goes. And this is for context, this is, so Jack has gone to church. So Jack didn't make it to church, then Jack makes it to church, then they have the big fallout. Like,
Yeah.
everyone, the Bowden
Okay.
family is offended on Jack's behalf, I think. And so it becomes almost like a feud between the fathers, between Ames and Bowden.
Right.
And then we get the porch conversation, as I've dubbed it. After that is kind of the reconciliation, right? That's the word they use too, the reconciliation. On page 214, they mention that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, the build up to it is kind of orchestrated by Glory and by Jack.
And Lila, is Lila part of it too or not? No, it is. It's the siblings. You're right.
Yeah.
Now Lila does say a few things. You know, she kind of wanders up later, doesn't she, during the porch conversation?
I think
she
so.
says,
She is part of it.
Yeah. What about being saved? You know, she says that, and that, you know, that kind of changes the trajectory of the conversation.
But yeah, Damon, I think you're right. It's the two siblings who know how the two older men, their friendship, how it works. And they know, well, hey, if he reads this and then he reads this, and then they can argue about it. And that's what they like to do. That's essentially what they put into motion. But it also, to me, seems atypical to their normal conversations. Maybe, I mean, it plays out how Glory says it's going to, but then also with Jack being, maybe it's because Jack is part of the conversation too, that it ends up being, like you were saying, a little more forthcoming than we get otherwise.
Yeah, I in the midst of it, I found it interesting, or maybe in the buildup, I think, to the reconciliation, there's this sort of acknowledgement that Ames, the only one who would have known more about Jack and what Jack meant to his father than Ames is God. and so Ames would have known the depths to which his sermon would have wounded not only Jack, but also his best friend, it seems like, since the day they were both born.
Right, lifelong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead, Constance.
Yeah, Bowden says if Ames calls, if it's Ames on the phone, tell him I'm dead.
Yeah. Which also connects to this kind of theme of death that's coming up, and and we can get to that maybe in a little bit. But the central question, it seems to me, of this porch conversation has to do with this question of predestination. It has to do with this question of, are people just fated to be who they are? And Jack seems, I think in some ways Jack is looking for someone to say, no, you can be different if you want, right? And his dad just always forgives him automatically, which isn't really calling for a change in behavior. It isn't really saying that you can change if you want to. And Ames, it'd be interesting to hear what younger Ames thinks about this question, because I think his experience with Lila, who I keep forgetting is his second wife, has, I don't know about softened, but made him rethink some of these things. And it's Lila is the one who says definitively a person can change.
Well, and I think, and it just occurs to me that Lila is also worldly, not in the way that Jack is worldly. I mean, Jack, worldly, if you apply it to Jack, it doesn't sound like a good thing, but in Lila's case, it seems like, a variety of experience and being open-minded and that kind of thing. Excuse me for interrupting there.
No, you're fine. Yeah.
So interesting, the comparisons and contrasts between the various characters, how they're alike and how they're different in ways we wouldn't expect, and the ways that makes us think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And thinking about how these characters are alike and different. And I think we spend a lot of time asking this question about can a person change? And we're asking about Jack, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think we can ask the same question about most all of these characters.
Mm-hmm.
Bowden hasn't really seemed to change at all in the entirety of his lifetime, and he seems unwilling to reconsider things at this point in his life. I don't know if Ames has changed or like. I wonder about all of these. Are any of these characters growing, or are they just kind of is who they are, who they've always been? I suppose.
I see more growth and change in Ames, but with Lila being the catalyst, he was, I think, prior to her, sort of in his own lane of like, this is just how it's going to be now. This is the rest of my life until the end of my life. And I look at their relationship as a turning point for him. But that's not something that Bowden's marriage and life and everything was so different. And I think, Constance, you pointed out, like he's still continuing, as we've seen prior to this part of the book, of like just living in the past too, and like clinging to those memories and all that stuff. And what did you say about that? You said something about it might just be in his mind that it was like,
I think, yeah, because he always says yes. I remember those good times. And then the kids, they come home, but they just can't wait to leave.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. I think the guy's a hypocrite.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking back to that one early section where he doesn't want to give, what is it, Mr. Trotsky, a use of his land, and he didn't want the city to put a road through. And the mayor himself says under his breath, "You old hypocrite."
Oh, okay.
Because he's not, behaving in a Christian way at all.
And to me, as it
go ahead, Ann.
Oh, I'm sorry. And as the novel, as we're getting toward the end of the novel, it seems to me that he's a hypocrite, but he's also getting just more and more self-absorbed. And I see that's and I think there's a sad kind of realism there. I've known other, really elderly people who were, more, focused on other people when they were younger, and then the older they got, the more everything revolved around them. And I think we have, kind of a realistic portrait there.
Well, and if Bowden is really that close to the end, which isn't that the sort of the sense that we're getting, that if they're worried that a bad conversation could send him over the edge and he would die, he's really not well or long for this world. But it's only Jack and Glory who are home. And where are the other five? I understand they have lives and such, and maybe they're geographically spread around, but where's the rest of the family? If it really is, if their father is really close to death, which then, you all had mentioned in your notes, this like repeated stuff about death that we're seeing in the novel. It's just that, I don't know, listening to you just talk made me ask, well, wait, where's everybody else? Why aren't they making an effort to come see him?
Yeah, and it's interesting also that because the Bowtons have apparently been in Gilead for, I don't know, since the dawn of time.
Right. Forever.
Apparently, right? I mean, at least his grandparents, at least Reverend Bowton's grandparents were there, and his parents, and he lives there. It's interesting that none of the children stuck around town.
Right.
Which for a family they had 8 kids, right? It wouldn't be uncommon, especially in that time, for at least one of them, to find and create a life in town. But they all left Gilead.
It seems like a terrible kind of thing to try to uphold, that father's, visions of what the past was like. And, they have to look at old photo albums and laugh at old jokes. And
well, it's the pressure to be seen and seeing everything in their past as perfect and shiny and bright. And one thing I noticed in the very beginning of this section was just the surface. They're just skating along the surface of conversations and interactions within the home, because they can't go deeper than that, or he won't go deeper than that, or he's willing, that the struggle has been there, that the history with Jack has been hard, and yet the Reverend just keeps trying to polish everything, and maybe that is part of it. Like the children, it's such an effort to carry that while they're there that they just instead stay in their own realities. I don't know.
Well, and there's that reference close to the end of this section to the way they all lie and just kind of accept, as a matter of sort of courtesy, that we're not going to question this.
Do you know where that was? I remember something about how.
Oh, okay, I'm going to have to set the phone down so that I can look in my book.
That's fine. And I know there was one thing I underlined about the family, page 247, where it said, this is Glory talking, her family was slower to forgive a failure of discretion than they were to forgive most things actually prohibited in scripture, which I thought was an interesting. Yep. I mean, I think we kind of knew that already just based on what's happened, but it was like an interesting familial definition of how they interact.
Yeah, which relates to that keeping up appearances, sort of a thing, or
that's true.
This sort of sense of we kind of need to protect like the honor of the family, and live up to the kind of community perception, perhaps of the family. But go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to look back after we're finished and find. I thought I could turn right to that passage about the lies, and I turned to where I thought it was, and it wasn't there.
Okay, but that's something we can definitely come back to and talk about.
Yeah.
The one other question I had, because several of you had mentioned the idea of death, and that final section of this section where we sort of see Jack's fall, right? The letters start coming back from Della, and we don't know who's sending them back, but the letters are being returned, and that is just it. Jack, that's the start of Jack's demise here. And it took me a moment to realize what was going on. Like, I didn't realize he was drunk at first. I don't know why I was confused, but I didn't know what was happening. And also I'm like, oh, and that scene with Glory and Glory cleaning him and everything. I mean, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah, so Glory goes to check the mail one day because it came early. Otherwise Jack would be the one
Yes.
to get it, and which made me wonder, like, are these the first ones that have come back?
Oh,
Or
interesting.
have there been others? And Jack has just kept them to himself, because he's said in the midst of, and so at any rate, we find out that the letters that Jack has been sending to Della are marked returned to sender, and Jack starts to really avoid people. After that, he says hi essentially to Glory in the morning, and then is out the door all day until he comes back. Yeah, and then one night he doesn't come back, and she finds him out in the barn, in the car, or next to the car.
Next to the car, yep.
Drunk, and he's jammed his socks
And shirt.
and shirt in the
Embroidered shirt.
yeah,
The
that
shirt.
Della,
The shirt.
yeah. And yeah, I think, Anne, you kind of pointed out in your writing that there's a reference here to Lazarus, and many references to death related to this. So I don't know if you could say a little bit more about that, maybe.
Well, just I think we're being asked to consider in who is dead here and in what ways, and can they come back to life?
Yeah, I hadn't made the connection until you pointed it out, but it's easy. You right here, Glory bathing him, perhaps as one does preparing a corpse for burial. And it made me think about the women who go, well, they ask for Jesus' body off the cross so that they can prepare it for burial. And then there's women who go to the tomb looking for Jesus, and they're taking with them fragrances and that sort of thing to kind of continue to dress the body in some way that I hadn't thought about. There's kind of a I think it's Mary Magdalene that washes Jesus' feet with her hair. Yeah, this is like the physically closest, one of the like physically closest that these characters get to each other, other than I suppose when Jack picks up Bowden and takes him to bed.
That I noticed that in this section too. They are so reluctant to touch each other, and Jack especially, it's like they're afraid if they touch him, they will spook him and he will just bolt.
Yeah, which I don't know. Would that be so bad? I suppose it would be.
Yeah.
But in the midst of that, it seemed to me that he tells Glory, because Glory has to go to his room to get him clothes. And he says, you might find a couple of bottles in there. I've been taking from the bench again, which made me think, yeah, and I assume they're alcohol bottles, which made me think that maybe this isn't the first letter that has come back, or maybe he's taken these conversations with Ames harder than we thought.
Yeah, I started to notice Jack's pullback with, I suppose, after he actually went to church, and granted he sort of had the support, I think, of his father and sister, because they were, united in their anger at Ames. But I hadn't thought about that. If perhaps that the fall of Jack and the sobriety had come actually before those return letters.
Constance, what did you think of that scene?
I was just thinking that Jack often uses alcohol when he's afraid.
Mm.
I mean, when he didn't come home, he obviously was drinking to try to get up his courage to come home. He says that he was afraid to come home. And maybe, you know, to get up the courage to try to kill himself.
Yeah.
That may have been why he had
Yeah.
been drinking.
Oh, is that why he stuffed things into the tailpipe?
Yes.
That's how
Yes.
I read
yeah.
it as a suicide attempt. Yeah.
It's a suicide attempt.
Oh, okay. Well, that changes my reality.
Yeah.
I thought it was just like a quirky thing that a drunk guy did.
No.
No,
He was
no.
intending to take
That-
his most precious thing, which is that shirt, and
Yeah.
ruin it that way.
Yeah, in that
He's
attempt.
pretty darn serious about the attempt.
But yeah,
You know-
I didn't get it at first. I mean, in my notes, it's literally suicide attempt. Like it was just the way that scene, it starts on 243, and the way it unfolds from there, it's so strange. But there is an interesting line there where he spooks, he sort of startles, scares, alarms, go on, glory. And he says, "It's your brother Jack," he said, "your brother Jack without his disguise." That line, I don't know what to do with that line exactly, because I'm not really sure what he's saying there.
What page is that, Jenny?
243. Your brother Jack without his disguise. And I guess I've been trying to figure out like what I don't know, but it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, because that caught my attention as well. Now I want to go back and look at reread that conversation between Bowden and Ames and the porch conversation.
Yeah, I think it needs to be reread too. I agree.
And see how it ended. So that's a suicide attempt.
Yeah.
And he's saying, this is me without everything else was a disguise. And when what I am really is at this low emotional state. Like I am in this place of depression. That's who I am.
You know, I think it's interesting. Notice though, he refers to himself in the third person here.
Okay.
And he actually does that a lot. And I'm not sure where that goes, but when he's supposedly, you know, getting down to bedrock about himself, he doesn't say, "This is me."
Interesting. Yeah.
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 Do you think that signifies like his just unwillingness to accept where he is, or what?
I'm not sure, but
Okay.
but I think it something we need to keep thinking about.
Yeah. Is he saying this is how you assume that I am?
Yeah. Huh.
Or I'm willing to say this much about myself, but I'm not really getting to the inner heart of the matter because I'm talking about myself as if I'm somebody else.
Yeah.
You know, he never quite levels with anybody, I don't think.
Right, which is why the disguise thing confuses me, because it's like, but you've been like this. I mean, not being caught in the midst of a suicide attempt, but you haven't presented as some shiny, happy copy of your father, even though we get lots of discussion of how they are similar and the ways that they dress and the ways that they look and all of this stuff. So I don't know. I'm thinking about that disguise comment, and I'm going to see if I can see some more of those Jack referencing himself in third person. That will be an interesting thing to look for as we finish out the book.
Thinking about the importance of discretion in the family. and how Glorious, like she sets up a chair in the yard or something so that she can give him a bath, but she's very careful to do it in a place where that no one will see, including their father. Yeah, so that just that sense of this is not a thing that we can be honest and open about, even with Dad.
Right.
Boy, do I ever feel like a fool for missing that. This is why we read things in groups, people. Come on.
Hey, I have missed things in books before that we won't hold this over you forever, but I have missed big things in books that I have friends who still tease me about it because it happens. It happens.
Yes.
Hey, you guys, have I disappeared from the screen? Because I can't see you guys anymore. My phone rang and I don't know how to get back in.
I can see you and hear you.
Yeah, you're still there.
Well, I'm just looking at a white screen.
Uh-oh.
I'll just content myself with that because I can't see what to push to get back in.
Nope, you're still here.
Okay.
Well, and I think we're kind of at the end of this section anyway, right? Where I'm curious, if there are things that others are looking for because we're finishing the book, right? The next time we meet, we will have finished reading.
Yes. So
Good.
we will have, so next week we'll have one of our open Zoom conversations. And then the week after that will be the wrap up conversation. So.
Okay, so we're actually not finishing the book. We're reading to page 300 for next week. And then we have another shorter section.
Yes, before the four of us discuss again. By the time the four of us come back together, we will have finished.
Right.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Sounds right. Yeah. Oh, I wanted to mention, I just feel like the Grim Reaper here, coming, back to this death thing. But I'm wanting to mention also, and speaking of things that a person might miss, maybe you all knew this when you saw it, but I had to look it up. When Jack refers to et ego in Arcadia, that's a line. Actually, I did look it up. That's a line from somewhere in the classics. I couldn't find that, but it's a painting it's a 19th century painting by Nicolas Poussin, and it's these people in this wonderful sort of sylvan scene, and they come across a grave, and there's a skull involved, and I am in Arcadia, I is death.
Okay.
So this is death speaking, and so we can kind of see some obvious parallels to at least Bowden's picture of Gilead as some kind of Arcadia, as some kind of special paradise-like place, and and even here is death. So anyway, just tossing that in.
Yeah, I'm looking it up here. So I thought maybe I'd just screen share it real quick.
I was that would be great if you could. I don't have
if I
the
can
tech
get a better
capacity.
Okay, here we go. I think I'm close. I'm on it. Share screen. This one. Share.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see that, Anne.
Yes. Yep.
Is that the image that you were looking
Yes.
at?
Yes. That's the Poussin painting.
I'm in Arcadia, and Arcadia is just like a place.
Well, it's a place. Yeah, in classical mythology, it's a place. It's like an ideal place.
Okay, that makes more sense to me than because we went to Maine this summer. We went to Acadia National Park, so it makes sense. We did not see death there, so that's good.
That's good. Yeah.
That's good.
Oops, now I'm gone again.
Oh, I stopped the
Okay.
screen share. So, yeah, I'm trying to, does he say that during his, while Gloria is washing him? Is that when he says that?
He says that I think a little before she's, but it's
Okay.
during this time when he's, obviously at his really low point.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, that makes me anticipate the next 75 pages much differently than than what I had been kind of. I guess I don't really know what to expect. It's much like Gilead. It's not a novel where a lot of things happen. It's not a novel where there's, it's not like, oh, we're gonna find out who did it at the end, or
Right. I mean,
we're gonna find out if they escaped Dinosaur Island or not, right? It's it's not that. It's much closer to actual lived life, right?
Yeah.
Where there really aren't very many
Yeah.
beginnings or endings
Right.
to things. So I don't know what to expect.
Yeah, it wasn't like, it's not actually a fair question. What are you anticipating at the end of this novel? I have no idea. No idea.
Yeah.
Mm.
Will Jack still be there? Will Jack leave? Will Glory leave?
Yeah.
Will Bowden die? Eventually, probably.
Yeah. I know I keep saying this, but I do at some point in my, very calm and peaceful life, I need to go back and look at Gilead and see like where did Gilead leave off? Because we have this sort of like layered storytelling
Yeah.
between the
Yep.
two books. And I'm going to try. I can't promise it will happen in the next 2 weeks, but I'm going to try to do that because I do think it would be interesting to remember where we were then, where we end up here, and see how that all fits together. I don't know. Maybe we'll see.
Yeah. I seem to recall it ends with him like sleeping in the sun or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so anything else that we should make sure that we get in before we wrap things up?
This is a funny little thing to bring up, but I thought about it a little while ago. For Bowden, Ames remembers him being way too old to be pushed around in a buggy wearing a, like a christening gown and bonnet. He says he was about 10 or something.
And he's like, no, I was only 6.
His grandmother was pushing him around, but it kind of seems like he's back to that, sort of being protected and coddled in that same way.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so next week, for those playing along at home, we'll have another one of our open Zoom conversations, and folks can contact the church if they would like the link for that. I do have a little email group that I email out the link to as well. So, and then this group of 4 will return in 2 weeks' time to read the last 25 pages or so and sort of wrap things up as best we are able. And also, I would say, if this is a thing that folks are enjoying and folks would maybe like to see continue maybe in the spring, we find a spring read, we can do that. And if folks would really like for that, just contact the church or email me and let me know, and we'll start turning some gears on that. So So I guess until next time, we'll wait and see if Bowden does eventually grow out of his infancy or not. Jenny doesn't have high hopes.
I don't.
No.
I'm shaking my head. If you're listening, I'm shaking my head.
No, neither does Anne. It seems to me, in sort of keeping with some of the themes of the novel, that very few folks in this world seem really willing to change, which I suppose is true of most of our wandering around. But so we will be back then. My thanks to Jenny and to Constance and for Anne for joining in this conversation. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.